For most Americans, when you see a general officer, you think this guy is the top of his game. It's like a CEO. He's probably somebody who's somebody who's come up through the ranks, has, got lots of education, lots of experience, and only the best and the brightest get sent up to that point. Only the best of all the guys that we have get to be generals. So when they say something, historically, Americans go, they're telling the truth. Generals, especially in the military, have the reputation in the public for being honest. And so whatever they say, they can believe, as opposed to a politician. These guys are just, giving their best military advice, take it or leave it, etc. That's actually not the case. In fact, as I've been writing for quite a number of years, for many years, that's I won't say the opposite is true, but there are a number of generals, and especially retired generals, who are very loose with the truth. And in fact, a lot of it is in the eye of the beholder, what even is true. But then there are other times, and this is why it's really pernicious, many times it's flat out deception, intentional, willful deception of the American people. And it's just hard for us to get our heads wrapped around that, because we're taught and brought up to believe, no, you can trust the military. You can trust what they say. And unfortunately, now that it's to the situation, and we have gotten to a point to where you have to take it with a grain of salt. I'll believe it when I can see it. I need to see the evidence and the proof. Because of so much deception, that's now required. That's exactly what you should do. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because there are too many, even current serving generals, as has been the case for quite a while, and especially a lot of the retired generals who are flooding the airwaves with their pronouncements and things that they say that are either absurd, if you look under the surface, or they're just outright deception. They're saying things they know aren't true. And who knows what their motivations are. They're all over the place. But you need to know what the truth is. And really kind of one of the things that's driving right now is because of a former national security advisor for Trump, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, has a book out right now that's, kind of his tell-all book from his time in the White House. And he is literally saturating the airwaves. Every channel you want to look at. I mean, major networks, cable networks, everything in between. He is all over the place sharing his book. And I'll just tell you, I used to work for H.R. McMaster. I was a lieutenant when he was a captain. We fought together in Desert Storm. That's us right there. And I think it's March 1991, after the big battle of 7-3 Easting, where HR first started getting his fame. That's his tank in the background, by the way. I was a fire support officer underneath him. We helped to coordinate the battle. I've talked about my experience in that a lot of times, but this one's hard for me to do, because I'm going to expose some things, and I'm going to tell you some things that just aren't so, or else it's just really bad advice. And it's hard for me to do, because for 20-something years, HR and I were good friends, and I considered him a close friend. But we had a falling out in Afghanistan in 2010. I think it was 2010, 2011 timeframe. Both of us were deployed there at the same time. I saw some things that were really problematic. This picture here is from when I was out on a patrol. I want to say this is in the part of the Kunar province. There's some other ones in there. Also, these are some of the patrols. So I went, because when I went there, this is why it's really important, and I want to point this out. I wasn't just deployed to Afghanistan, but my particular job as the chief of the Rapid Equipping Force required me to go all over the country, to go on patrols with with privates, to meet with company commanders, platoon leaders, division commanders, brigade commanders, et cetera, because I needed to find out exactly what was going on in the grounds, so that if they had any equipment needs, that I could relay that back to Washington, so that they could cut through all the red tape and get it immediately, as opposed to the normal acquisition cycle, which usually took longer than a brigade would be deployed in the first place. So that gave me an absolutely, probably unique position on Afghanistan, more than anyone else, because I was high enough rank to where I could move around and talk to everybody, whether the 2-star generals or the division commanders, all the way down to the working man, the privates. But I wasn't so high that like they wouldn't talk to me. And because I wasn't part of their command, it was easy for people to discuss with me. So I got the straight skinny all the way through. And I saw with my own eyes. I didn't have to take the word of anyone. But when I could talk to them on the ground and then see with my own eyes, that literally gave me the best view of anybody. So when I tell you what is being said in public is not lining up with what was true on the ground, I have some credibility on that. And listen, I wrote actually in 2012. So after I got back from when those pictures were taken, I wrote in the Armed Forces Journal, Truth, Lies in Afghanistan. And I told how many military leaders are let us down. I originally subtitled that How Military Leaders Are Lying, but the author, the editor of the magazine thought that would be too incendiary and it might get me in more trouble than I already got, because I assure you it was not, did not make anyone happy what I was saying there, because I completely cut against the narrative, because the narrative at the time by all the generals was that things are going well, things are on the right azimuth, things are improving. The Afghan National Security Forces are becoming stronger. They're taking the lead. They're providing motivation to their countrymen and reason why they should turn against the Taliban. The Afghan government is getting less and less corrupt and more capable, and the people are believing in them. And we just need a little more time. Things are going good. None of it was true. It was never true. And when all these leaders come out and say the opposite, I felt a moral obligation, as I was taught, ironically, by the generals. They always teach us to have integrity. That's one of the Army's 7 values, and tell the truth no matter what the cost. I mean, they literally teach us that, except when it's against the narrative. Then, of course, they don't want it to. And I won't go into details now, but it made life rather miserable for me. But it didn't matter. That wasn't a concern when deciding what I had to do, because the cost of what these people were doing and saying was egregiously high, and American people deserve. Now, I had no fantasies that President Obama at the time was going to change American policy based on what I said, but that didn't matter to me. That wasn't up to me. It was only up to me to tell the truth, and that's what I did. And so that's what I'm going to do again here today. So with this tell-all book, one of the reasons why I'm making this show here is because I've been watching a lot of these segments from McMaster as he pitches his book on all these different networks. And one consistent thing I've noticed, at least with every single clip I've seen, and I have not yet seen any exceptions, nobody challenges him on anything. They literally take every word he says at face value. And of course, he's trying to bank on the discontent with Trump, and obviously he was fired and they left under bad circumstances. So he's not going to say anything good about Trump, or at least not anything genuinely good. And he's going to bank on that to have book sales. And especially if he's on McMaster is on a liberal news channel that already doesn't like Trump, of course, they're not going to want to challenge him. But even some on Fox News, they also haven't challenged him, because I think he's a general. So of course he's telling the truth. So no one needs to question that. But folks, he needs to be questioned. And it's not just him. And I'm going to show you a couple of other examples of what some other generals, or just some egregiously untrue things, have said at our expense. And that's the key point I'm trying to get through here. There is a cost to us to continue to give deference to these people. We need to forget about that. That needs to be off the table. We don't give anybody else a free pass when they come on and say something on television channels or shows or whatever, or interviews in print media. Everybody needs to be challenged on this. And if it turns out true, cool, go ahead with it. Some things are opinions. You can have this opinion, I can have this opinion. Blue is the best color. No, I think it's red. Okay, that's not a right or wrong issue. That's a preference. So there's room for that. You can debate left and right, and it doesn't matter. When it's the truth or not truth, then it matters. And when you're being told that things are a certain way here and they're not, and then we support policies based on that flawed interpretation, then there's a real cost, especially when what they're being told undermines a positive outcome for our side. And that is playing out in spades here, and especially on this Afghan war situation. And that's one of the key things about McMaster's book, because it was time to come out with the 3rd anniversary of our withdrawal from there. And he really hits on that a lot. Now, he was positioned in Afghanistan in that time I was there as a task force. I can't remember the exact, I'm not saying this right, probably Shariat, something to that effect. He was supposed to be working with the governments under Petraeus, General Petraeus, to get rid of corruption in the government. And all the time he was there, and this is what led to a lot of our, actually, this is exactly what led to our fallout. he was saying all these flowery things and all this progress was being made. And I was there. And I know it wasn't true. And of course, now the whole world knows it wasn't true because the corruption continued on pervasive until the government literally collapsed because they were so corrupt. And they never had the authority or the confidence of the people. So that's what I saw with my own eyes. Now then, McMaster is coming on telling everybody that actually the withdrawal was a disaster. Not in how it was conducted, though he has a lot of scorn for the Biden administration. As you know, so do I. The way we conducted the withdrawal was wrong. But the fact of getting out, as I have also always said, was absolutely the right thing. It should have been done many, many years before. But McMaster is of the opinion it should never have been done. In his view, we should have stayed there forever. We should still be there to this day. And I'm not exaggerating on that. That is what he said. He has lifted up the Korea model as an example, and many others that he cites, saying we stayed there forever. We stayed in these places. We're still in Korea. We should still be in Afghanistan. He says we should have about 8,000 troops is one of the numbers that he cites. We could have had that and we could have sustained that for a long time. But what he doesn't talk about is why. Why would we want to do that? Now, he does offer a little bit of reason why, and I'm going to cover that in a separate part of this episode here. But first of all, I want to talk about this next one because he's talking in the context in the clip I'm about to show you on Fox News about the Afghanistan situation, but then he makes a really strange connection to the Russia-Ukraine war. Watch this.
I think you can draw a direct line between August 2021 and the renewed invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022, because I think Putin looked at us leaving in such disarray, in such a humiliating fashion, and said, "These guys are finished, and I'm going to have my way with Ukraine."
Okay, so here's the first part. I'd stop the clip right there. But if you'd have kept on, the anchor just went on to the next topic and just talked about something else. Didn't even question that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That Putin decided to invade Russia or Ukraine because of our withdrawal from Afghanistan? Listen, I mean, try to picture this. Russia, who, as part of leading the Soviet Union, had a disaster in Ukraine, in Afghanistan. For a full decade, they had a disastrous war there. And they realized shortly after it started, as it turns out when you do all the history, about 5 years in, they realized this is disaster and it's not going to go anywhere. Gorbachev ended up pulling them out of there because he realized it was a dead end. It had no possibility. And he kind of took a long, methodical road to get out of there. They left in order. They left behind a functioning government, a functioning military, which lasted until the Soviet Union collapsed and all their money left along with it. Ironically, they actually had something to succeed, but they were there for, quote, only 10 years. So nobody knows more how stupid it is for a global power to get sucked in Afghanistan. So Russia's not going to go, well, because you left, then I'm going to go into this country here. Those things are completely separate. We should have left a long time ago, because it was stupid for us too, and there was nothing to gain, and it was all cost, which we now see playing out that way. But to suggest that Putin made any connection with his desire to go into to Ukraine blinds and completely covers over the actual reason why he went into Ukraine. Because of the 15 years prior to that, starting in the Bucharest summit, the NATO summit in Bucharest in the year 2008, when we openly declared NATO was going to bring in Ukraine and Georgia into the alliance. And he started at that time saying, that is a red line. We are not going to allow that. We are not going to contemplate that. There's many historical reasons why that one, even as opposed to the Baltics, which they didn't like, but it wasn't as big a deal militarily, much, much bigger deal for Ukraine. Because it's the heartland. It points right to Moscow, and it would give any invading army great ease to be able to attack on short notice into the country. So he said, that's a no-go. We're not going to allow that. And then we just continued to ignore it all the way through until it built up until February 2022, when he finally made good on it. And of course, if you know anything about the reality that we have exposed here, as that he told Biden in the summer, June specifically of 2021, that there would be war if NATO continued to press on towards Ukraine. Biden reportedly, according to a diplomat I've talked to, said, okay, do whatever you want to do, but we're going to crush you if you do, because we can hammer you in ways that you don't want to, as opposed to having any kind of negotiations and saying, all right, how can we avoid this? And then we've ignored every opportunity to get the thing off the table since then. And we keep saying yes, as recently as this past summer in July, where we said, sure, NATO is still going to invite Ukraine eventually. It's inevitable, and all this kind of nonsense, ensuring that Russia continues to push forward. Everything we have done has given Russia every reason in the world to do what it did from its perspective. Now, Russia bears the responsibility for what they had, because there were ways they could have avoided to. There still were some diplomatic tools that could be done. So I'm not going to defend Putin's decision to go into Ukraine, but I am absolutely telling you that it was prompted by our actions, and he gave plenty of warning and off-ramp possibilities for us, and we didn't want any of them. And for H.R. McMaster to now tell you that, oh, it was because he saw weakness, and that's a theme he's been hitting a lot. The dictator saw weakness in ours, and so he launched into it, as though this is crazy. But just follow the logic here. As though, according to McMaster, if we had stayed in Afghanistan and not left, that Putin would not have gone into Ukraine. That's absurd. That's absurd at the face value. You don't even have to be an expert at all. You don't have to understand hardly anything to know that Russia was going to do what it's going to do no matter what Afghanistan had to do. So there's no connection with that. Yet that's what he's telling you. Next one there is, now we're getting back to the Afghanistan part of it again. And now HR is going to either omit or fudge some of the things that actually happened to get to another conclusion that doesn't make any sense. Roll the tape.
We negotiated a withdrawal, a surrender, essentially, I think I would call it, a self-defeat at least, with the Taliban, really across two administrations. But even the Obama administration, when they completely pulled out of Iraq in December 2010, didn't negotiate with al-Qaeda on the way out. Why the hell didn't we just leave?
Okay, there's a reason why. Because we had the negotiations he's talking about was the Doha Agreement in 2020. And let me help you out, General McMaster. Let me help you remind you that there was a conflict going on at that point, and Americans were still dying. Even though it was smaller numbers than it had been earlier, there was still the active combat. So Trump negotiated, instead of just saying we're going to leave and not giving anyone time to do anything and just causing complete and utter chaos, he said we're going to have a predictable time frame. And part of the deal was, Taliban, you don't attack us, we're not going to attack you. And so the killing stopped of American troops at that point. There were no more until the Abbey Gate disaster at the end. And that's a whole separate reason. That wasn't the Taliban either. That was ISIS. So Trump's initially successful at stopping the killing of Americans. And then what should have happened was this predictable time frame by May 31st of 2021 was the deadline. It says we will have withdrawn all our troops by that point. So from, I think it was February 2020 to May of 2021, we had all the time in the world for the Pentagon to obey the order of the commander-in-chief that he committed the United States to, and said, all right, we have whatever that was going to be, 12, 14 months to plan this out. And so what we're taught in the military, especially the Army, is that, okay, if this is your end date when you have to execute, then you do all these milestones and you back date it, so that each month as you get closer, you're methodically down, so that by the time you get to the end, it's a nice clean break and we end the story right then. That's what should have happened. And if the Pentagon had done that, then that's exactly how it would have worked out. We would have left at the end of May of 2021 in order. There would have still been a functioning government. There would have still been a functioning military. Everything would have been fine. There would have been no Abbey Gate disaster. Everything would have been orderly. There wouldn't have been this horrible, chaotic scenes at the airport that Gary keeps showing a few times here that are now iconic. None of that would have happened. But the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Milley, didn't want to get out either. None of the generals want to. They want to keep these wars going on as long as possible. I think I played a couple of days ago part of the testimony where General Milley said, no, I advised against that. I don't think we should have. We should have kept it at 2,500. That was the number he chose. We should have kept it at that, and we could have perpetually gone on there. HR said 8,000. He said 24,500. But the bottom line is they never wanted to leave. They wanted to continue staying there militarily, even though the military itself, who could ever forget that? The military itself is supposed to be subordinate to the political aim. It's supposed to be the politicians who set policy and the military who execute it. whether they want to or not, whether they like it or not, it's not even supposed to matter. But unfortunately, we get to the point now to where the military guys are going, yeah, it does kind of matter. And so you had Milley slow rolling things. You had Milley doing whatever it took to not. In fact, the other information that I have firsthand knowledgeable about from a participant is that there was an order to withdraw completely before Trump left office. So they wanted to accelerate it to actually get out faster while it was still under President Trump. But Milley subverted that and actually went back with the acting Secretary of Defense at the time and talked Trump out of it, even though he had already signed an order. So he went back and changed it. And Trump bears responsibility too, because he was the commander in chief and he could have just told the guy pound sand, but he didn't. But nevertheless, the generals put so much pressure on him that he finally gave in and said, all right, we'll leave it on the current tape. But then the Pentagon, instead of saying, all right, well, we still have the May 31st deadline, instead took no action because they believed, and I've also been talking to people who've said this, that behind the scenes, the U.S. military was telling the Afghan side, yeah, don't worry about that, because as soon as Biden gets in, he'll change the deal. We're not going anywhere. We're going to stay. So no one took any action. The Afghan people didn't take action. The Afghan government, military, nobody made any plans. They were all assured we were going to stay. And then Biden ends up making the call. And then we actually are going to get it. He moved it back further, which had consequences because the deal was we would be out by May 31st. When we broke that part of it, then the Taliban actually went on and started taking even more military action. They still didn't attack us because they knew that would bring a lot more heat on themselves, but they sure as heck took lots of other action. And those additional months was all the difference in the world to allow them to set the stage for what eventually happened. If it had been on time, we wouldn't have had that. All of that is because the generals didn't want to give up anything. There's another thing that HR didn't understand here, and that is a timeline. Again, he's ridiculing President Trump. Of course, he wants to sell a book, so no surprise there, but he's missing a part of the story here too.
The series of decisions to reduce the support we were giving to Afghan security forces, not actively targeting the Taliban, which of course was one of the big flaws of the Obama administration approach, and then giving them a timeline for withdrawal. I mean, how does that work, Chris? You say, okay, I'm not going to go after the enemy. I'm going to get you actively. I'm going to give you a timeline for our withdrawal. Then I'm going to negotiate an agreement and a settlement that's favorable to us. It just cuts against the very nature of war.
No, it doesn't cut against anything. It makes perfect sense. And see, and again, he's selectively withholding information. He didn't tell the interviewer there that there was a deal and the reason why we didn't target the Taliban was because that was part of the deal so that they wouldn't target us. What's hard to understand about that? We're going to withdraw. So instead of announcing in February that we're going to leave next month and it's complete and utter chaos, he gave 14 or so months so that all parties involved could have coordinated and prepared for a seamless transition. And it would have worked if the Pentagon had executed according to the president's orders and if Biden had kept to it as well. So he also bears some responsibility because instead of just meeting the deal, he waited, I think, till like April to even make the decision. And of course, no action was being taken that time either. So lots of penalties to be issued here by both politicians and the generals. But all this together was orchestrated by the generals, and they wanted to keep us there. They didn't want to leave. And they're telling selective truths, and then they're also withholding information. So you see that we're getting a bigger pattern here. That's not the only guy. It's not just H.R. McMaster. If it was, who knows if I even would have made this, because I don't want to just come after him personally. This is a categorical issue. And so now that I want to show you who, when H.R. was in Afghanistan during the time I was, his boss, General Petraeus, was talking recently, and he said, hey, I'm not for getting out of these forever wars. I think they're kind of fine. Watch this.
I was not one who believed that you had to actually end endless wars. In fact, I opposed the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Yes, it was frustrating. Yes, it was maddening. Yes, our partners in Kabul were not all that we might hope they would be. We only had 3,500 troops on the ground. We hadn't lost a soldier in a year and a half. There was no reason. We had $25 billion and an $850 billion defense budget. So we need to be careful about this. This one, we need to ensure that Ukraine prevails when this is over.
So he says, we hadn't lost a troop in 18 months. There was no reason to leave. Why do you think we didn't lose a troop in 18 months? Because we had a deal so that we wouldn't lose any troops as long as we got out. That was a quid pro quo. That was tied together. He left that part of the story out too. And then you see he's really starting to illustrate here what the mentality is. It was only $20 billion. That's chicken feed to him, apparently. I can think of a lot of better things that we can do with that $20 billion, like take care of our people in any number of ways here in our country, or just not go into debt further. I mean, there's always that too. But you see, the focus him is just staying. He's not for getting out of forever wars. Unbelievable. He actually said that. He's actually for forever wars. And here's the problem with all these people. Nobody articulates a rational vision for why. Why should we stay in Afghanistan? Why should we stay in Iraq? Why should we stay in Syria? Why should we stay in Somalia? Why should we stay all over Africa? There is no reason. There is no valid military reason why we should do that. And they don't even really articulate that. They just say we should stay. We should not leave because we can afford it. And like McMaster says, hey, look, it worked in Korea. We stayed there forever. I mean, there's some argument that we probably didn't need to stay there forever, and that we could have left a long time ago and still would have been able to, there wouldn't have been war there. There's reason to think that. But that's not even a possibility. No one wants to even talk about getting out of anywhere. You also notice that Trump himself had said 3 separate times during his tenure that we were going to withdraw from Syria because the troops were no longer needed after ISIS had been physically deprived of their territory. But he was talked out of it all 3 times. And again, he deserves some criticism for not just saying, I'm the damn commander in chief, shut the hell up and execute my orders. And instead, he allowed himself to be talked out of it 3 times. But that shows you the institutional pressure on the president by the military. They just can't let it go. And that, Gary, if you can pull that map back up, the one you just showed there, it's a really good illustrative in that you see all of these troops stationed in all these places all over the Middle East. Why? What does that do for American national interests? What does that do for American security interests? Now, the claim is we're going after ISIS, like we just had an op the other day where 7 more Americans were wounded in action over something that's pointless and ridiculous, going after some ISIS people who pose no threat to America, but only potentially to people in the region. Okay, let Syria handle their ISIS problem. Let Baghdad handle its ISIS problem. That's their deal. It's their country. If these people are a threat to them, that's something they've got to manage and navigate. Why should America's armed force always be there to do that? But here's the bigger issue. Even if you had some reason why we should help Baghdad and we should help Damascus, though that's a real head scratcher, say that out loud and try to make that make sense. By taking care of ISIS in Syria, we're actually helping Bashar al-Assad, but we'll leave that one for another day. You don't actually get rid of ISIS. I mean, we've been there for however many years now. ISIS is about the same as they've been for the last several years. Whether you're there, whether you're not, whether you have these operations like we just had 7 Americans wounded, whether you don't, it don't make any difference. Because ISIS is not a threat to the United States that we can't handle with other assets that we have globally. More on that in a minute, too. I'm going to show you why that is. But Petraeus there in the last board, he was talking about Afghanistan in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, in this one here, just a couple of days ago, he's talking a little bit more about showing the mentality of our generals and retired generals.
Let's give them all that they can possibly use and then enable them to achieve everything that they possibly can, change the dynamics of this war so that there can be some kind of meaningful negotiations and get the guns to go silent, provide rock solid security guarantees for Ukraine, get them into the EU, and then allow Ukraine to flourish as continued independent democracy that embraces free market capitalism. And I, for one, don't believe that we can't do all of this and Indo-Pacific and help in the Middle East. I believe we have to.
Yeah. You see, he just has this global mentality thinking that the U.S. military has no limits. Doesn't matter. $20 billion is a deal over here. chicken feed. Yeah. Well, let's expand that a lot. Let's expand a whole bunch of the Indo-Pacific. Let's keep doing everything there that Gary was showing you in the Middle East. Let's keep doing all this stuff for Ukraine. I mean, aside from just you could have an aspiration. That's kind of what I'd like to do. It only makes sense if there's something possible good for the United States or our allies. And this just shows you the decrepit nature and the just terrible, heinous military advice given by this man. He's actually saying that we should give security guarantees to Ukraine, who is on track to lose this war. And there is no rational way to think that's going to be averted at this point, short of a willingness to negotiate an end immediately on the current line of contact. And I don't know if they can get it, but that's the best shot they got now. There's no hope at all, zero, that they're ever going to push Russia out of there. There's no possibility for that, none. And yet you hear him talking about, let's have a security guarantee and give them all they need to change the dynamics, even though all we've done for 2.5 years is continued to do that. And every single time they've tried to do something, whether it was the 2023 major offensive that they'd spent, close to 9 months preparing for, or this ill-fated foray into the north area in the Kursk incursion, everything has ended in disaster. And that was in the process of being in disaster right now, because they keep losing troops in the hundreds or possibly thousands per day, and they can't go any further. They've about maxed out what they can do, and there's no hope for holding that long term. Whether it's a little bit longer or a number of months, it's not going to make any difference. The end result's already determined. You can't stay there, and they're going to lose the troops, and they're going to have served no purpose at all. That's what just a basic common sense, rational understanding of the conflict that's going on. But you see, here's this general arguing for more. Let's bring them eventually into NATO. Let's have the security guarantee. Let's keep giving them more stuff, oblivious to the fact that wars are won with men, not machine. And Petraeus and McMaster aren't the only two in this corner either. They're joined by brother 4-star Jack Keane.
What the Ukrainians want to do is punish Russia as much as possible, take as much territory as they possibly can, prevent Russia from taking more territory in the Donbass region, and go into negotiations next year in the best possible position. And as long as the administration keeps stalling and protracting the war, and that's what restricting the use of U.S. weapons in the Ukrainians' hands is actually doing, slowing down Ukrainians' efforts to be able to gain leverage over the Russians, makes no sense militarily, makes no sense politically.
You know what doesn't make any sense militarily is having the fantasy that using a few long-range weapons is going to give the Ukraine side leverage over Russia to have a negotiated settlement to their advantage. That is fantasy. And for him to even say this should be ridiculed. But unfortunately, you see the pattern here, that the correspondents and the anchors, no one ever asks the hard questions. No one ever says, how is that going to work exactly? Because they have Storm Shadow missiles. They've been using those for a while. They have their own long-range drones. They've been using several of them. They have the U.S. HIMARS. They have the ATACMS systems. And there is some limitation on how far some of the ATACMS can be used, but they are using them, and they're using a bunch of this other stuff. How is handing a few more missiles going to make any difference? And of course, the answer is it's not. Because you're seeing already, and I keep saying this, but it's really important to point out here, the Russian side has virtually unlimited ability to reach out, and they've been doing it nearly every night here for the last week or so, to significant damage within the Ukraine side all throughout the area. Ukraine has been hitting Russian with drones and other kind of capabilities, their energy system. Russia has been hitting back. So it's like the Ukraine side punches Russia in the nose, and then Russia responds with 5 blows to their nose, head, body, and midsection. Because Russia always has more, and yet that has still not knocked Ukraine out of the war. So the idea that the far, far bigger Russia, with so many more assets and so many of them for the war-making materials, are beyond the range of even our long-range stuff, you can't do it. You can't make a rational military suggestion that a few long-range missiles, even a lot of long-range missiles, is going to change the dynamic of the war, much less give Ukraine leverage over Russia. It's simply not going to happen. Russia has millions more military age men from which to draw. So there's no shortage of that. They can have a mobilization, a forced mobilization of enormous size, which they have not done since the first year of the war, because they've recruited enough to be able to win on the ground right now. And they're already outnumbering them 3 to 4 to 1, sometimes 5 to 1 in some locations. Their industrial capacity is just off the charts bigger than the Ukraine side. You see what I'm saying? You just go down this list. It can't be done. So the advice he's given is just flat out wrong. It's inaccurate, but yet he lobbies for that all the time because all these generals, that's what they keep doing. Now, full disclosure, this is nothing new for me. I've been writing since 2013. I wrote a piece in the Armed Forces Journal that we need to purge the generals. We need to get rid of them because I identified that this was a big problem a long time ago, that they're lying to the American people. They're telling them things that aren't true. They're giving terrible advice. And I wrote down, here's what it's going to take to fix the Army. I wrote this detailed thing in there. It's crazy to think that these things that I talked about openly, and I was still in uniform at the time, so, I wasn't a real popular fellow at the Pentagon. But those things need to be said. And now that we're seeing it play out. So this is not something I'm coming to recently. I've been warning about this for literally more than a decade. And at some point, folks, we're going to have to start listening, or there's going to be some real problems here. And I want to point out here too, this is also not just me. Let's see, when I came back, first of all, when I came back from Afghanistan, I wrote a piece, I think I've mentioned before, also in the Armed Forces Journal, that was talking about the lies that were being told about Afghanistan. And this was the truth, lies in Afghanistan. That's what the Washington or the New York Times did a story on. Had a lot of media at the time. And a lot of people asked some of the generals. I remember General Scaparrotti was at the Pentagon when this came out, and a lot of the reporters went the next day after this was published and asked him, hey, Davis says this, which is very different from what you guys are saying. And he's like, I know, I read it. That's his point of view. It's not our point of view. I have access that he does, and I get to go with places and we're still very confident in our assessment. Okay, well, you know what? How'd that work out, General Scaparrotti? How did it work out from what you had been saying and what I had been saying in February of 2012 as of August 2021? You tell me now, who had the better assessment here? The one who was on the ground who told the truth, or the guys who kept wanting to say, nope, everything is going fine. Nothing to see here, folks. Just keep giving me money and moving on. You see, they're starting to build a pattern here. Well, it also wasn't just me, because in 2019, the Washington Post covered, to much ballyhoo at the time anyway, At War with the Truth. And it talked about how it wasn't just the generals, but many of the politicians and presidents on secretaries of defense, secretaries of state on down, all kinds of people were lying all the way through. They knew that things were not going well, and they told them. So you would have thought that it would have been time to start saying, all right, it's time to make a change here. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened. And you see it to this very day, that all these generals who keep giving these nonsensical statements, things that don't comport with reality, deceiving you on things that you need to know about, omitting things that are really important, and then characterizing them in any way that's going to keep the war going, any way that's going to keep money going into the wars, and not withdrawing troops anywhere. Now, I know one of the key charges is, well, we have to keep ourselves safe. We have to fight them over there so we don't fight them over here. That's why we need all those guys in the Middle East, because if we don't, all the terrorists are going to come flooding into the United States. That is nonsense. That is ridiculous. We have, in fact, we have a national defense security strategy for counterterrorism. And it's a very detailed document out there. And a lot of this has especially been done since 9/11, to where we identified a lot of holes and a lot of stovepiping, et cetera, where we weren't working very good across agencies, et cetera. And a lot of that has been fixed, and it is doing a sensational job. Look, there are plenty of terrorist threats out there in the United States. I think there's 70 some odd terrorist organizations that are identified by the State Department as potentially wanting to harm Americans. They're all over the globe. I mean, they're literally scattered to the four winds. They're all over the place. So what sense does it make to say we're going to keep a bunch of, actually not a bunch, a handful of troops in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, dots throughout Africa, et cetera, that somehow that's going to keep us safe here. If you just go down the thought process a little bit, you'll see how ridiculous it is. And it's absolutely absurd because look, I was in, Gary, if you could put that one back up when I was in the Kunar here. This is one of the places I was at in the middle of the surge. So I was there at the height of the time when there was 140,000 U.S. and NATO troops in Afghanistan. This right here is in the Kunar province. And you see how mountainous it is behind me. And you can see there's parts of a village across the river there. That's the Kunar River. And what struck me at the time that I was there, and this is late 2011, I believe, is when this photograph was taken, that there was, according to the U.S. troops who were in this area, they said that in the entire region here, we have, at first he said, we have control over the road, but everything off the road, 100 meters off on either side, we don't have control. And then he actually caught himself and said, well, actually, we have influence over everything 100 meters either side of the road because we don't have a permanent presence. We just periodically come. And he pointed to that village across the river and he said, we've never even been there. We have no idea who lives there at all. That could be Taliban. That could be their headquarters for all we know. We have no earthly idea. We never go there. So there was whole sections of that part of the country at the time that were off limits to the United States and with which we had no idea what was going on there. That's with 140,000 troops there. Now imagine what it was when we had 2,500, or when HR was saying, yeah, we should have stayed 8,000 here. What is 8,000 going to do in this entire country? And why does anyone think that there's something magic about the dirt in Afghanistan, that because we left there, that it's like there's something magic about that territory that's going to draw people from all over the world to plan targets of alteration against the United States here? People who say that have no idea how terrorism actually works. It is a global phenomenon. Now, just put yourself in the minds of a terrorist for a moment. Just pretend that you hate the United States and you actually wish it harm and you want to do something about it. Where are you going to go to plan this? Are you going to go where there's American troops, 8,000, 2,500, or are you going to go anywhere else in the world where there aren't American troops? And there's plenty of other opportunities and, limited governments or corrupt governments where you can operate, or even in the shadows. There's all kinds of things that you would do. And by the way, I don't know if any of these guys have noticed, it's the 21st century now. It's not the 18th century. And, Google and Amazon and Zoom and all these kind of things, they're not just used by American businesses. They're actually used by nefarious actors as well. All kinds of social media. There's all kinds of ways to make it secret and covert so that the signals can't be broken into or whatever. And they can make communications all over the place. They do it disjointed just the same way that everybody else does business today. You don't have to have terrain anywhere to plot a terrorist attack. And by the way, according to the 9/11 Commission report, that real big, thick book that they published in the aftermath where they explain what happened, Afghanistan was incidental to the process. It was not central to it. There was nothing special, even in 9/11, about Afghanistan. The only reason it played a role is because Osama bin Laden was there. But he had previously been in Sudan. And part of the earlier planning was actually done in Sudan and then later on some in Afghanistan. But then operational stuff in the planning, part of it was done in the United States, Florida, Maryland. Part of it was done in Germany. You see what I'm saying? Even the 9/11 deal took place all over the place and through electronic means and communications elsewhere. So if you did need some terrain to try and plan something out, you're not going to go where there's troops. And let me just kind of drive this home a little bit here. And let me show you this I think is really useful here. This is Google Earth. And I'm going to show you here. This is Afghanistan in the middle. Now that picture I took was up in the Kunar Mountains, and it was some of the area here. This is Pakistan right here, and I think you can even zoom in and see the river that I was talking about, the Kunar River. But in this area up in here, so you see that all this area, the Taliban could have been and was operating in all of these areas on either side of the border, because this line means nothing to the actual people. And even to this day, Pakistan has never been able to get control of all of their side of this territory either. So on either side, there's plenty of opportunity in this one place. But look, folks, that's just one part of the map. We know that Pakistan has all kinds of areas that are ungoverned, and then there's Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, even some parts of the hinterland in Iran, and certainly we know, obviously, in Syria, there's all kinds of ungoverned spaces in here, all over the place in Iraq as well. Where even to this day, there's still some area of ISIS going on there. So you can't get rid of what's even there right now. And then, oh, by the way, then there's this area down here in Yemen. This also completely off limits. All kinds of Al-Qaeda and whoever knows, nobody's going to interdict them down there. They can operate as they want. And then, of course, there's all through Africa here. And I've spent some time in Uganda right here. I've literally driven almost all the way up north into this area right here. Where I had a friend of mine took me to see a refugee camp that was from the South Sudan Civil War, where there's some people there, et cetera. And it takes hours to drive through here. And this used to be the terrorist organization, the Lord's Army, with what's the guy's name? Coney, I think his name was. And it took a decade to try to figure him out. And that's just in this one spot here. And if you got all of Africa, the whole continent, where all kinds of places it could be. You get the point. You get the point here. There is a whole world of physical terrain where we don't have troops. So it is irrational. Let me just blanket say it is irrational to suggest that we need American troops at a couple of dots in Afghanistan, 2,500 that can't do anything, or the ones we have right now, the 2,500 or so in Iraq, or the 1,000 or so that we have in Syria. They're meaningless. They don't do anything for our national security. The guys in Somalia, yes, you can go out like the ones did in, I think, Syria a few days ago, and you can kill an ISIS leader. And what? It literally is like saying, I'm going to drain an Olympic swimming pool with an eyedropper in the rain. Yeah, you can fill that eyedropper up every time. We have a professional military that can go after, targeted guys, and they could find somebody and they can do these operations and take them out. And what? Do these people not have even the slightest understanding of how terrorist organizations are built? They're designed so that people can be replaced easily. It's a very flat hierarchy, so it doesn't depend on one person or one personality. So if that person's taken out, the whole organization dies. They design it so that it can suffer the loss of anybody. There's like 2 or 3 guys always ready to join and take up the slack. That's just how it works. So these organizations, these operations do nothing for American national security, but they do provide a point of strategic vulnerability to us. Having those troops there does make it easy for Iran or Iran-backed groups to strike us if they're mad at Israel or they're mad at us being there. If those troops weren't there, they can't attack us. It is extremely difficult because of that global situation I told you, where we do have the ability to track and identify terrorist threats from all over the world because of our federal, state, local law enforcement's cooperation with friendly intelligence services of other nations all around the world. Every day, 24/7, 365, non-blinking, we're always looking for that and interdicting. There's a reason why we haven't had any major terror strikes since 9/11. I think the one in Boston many years ago was one of the few, and that was relatively small. But there's been a bunch of them, scores of them, in fact, that have been thwarted and didn't happen because of this global system we have. So you see in that whole ball that I showed you there of the earth, where there are no shortage, millions of square miles of territory which anyone could use to plan something against us should they need territory. But for the most part, they don't need any terrain. It's all done disjointed operations, telephone, phone calls, radios, all kinds of things that they do. So you see, the generals are lying to you. We do not need those troops there. They do not keep us safe. They do pose a threat to our troops for no value to our country. But these guys are locked into this mentality. They can't see any of it. They cannot see it. They are blind to the truth. And they are leading our politicians astray, who, because they're generals, give them deference. And they're like, well, I don't know. I'm not a general, so I didn't study this. They must be right. Now then, okay, in isolation, you can see where it's plausible. But not when you look back and you can see 2 decades plus of disaster. And when you can do the line of logic that I'm talking about right now, how it's utterly disaster. Everything that they're saying is demonstrably false. And it is time to start calling them out on this. It's time to stop just being deference because they're a general. The performance has to matter now. And especially, my God, somebody like David Petraeus, who has been disaster. He's the architect of the disaster of the Afghan war, which I've been arguing since 2009 was headed towards failure and that we would lose if we didn't make major changes. And now then he told you all along it was getting better. And then he infamously said in May of 2023 that the Ukraine offensive was going to work and it was going to drive Russia out and their defenses would crumble and crack and possibly even collapse. That was the alliteration that he used at the time. Didn't quite work out that way. Now then the opposite, a year later, more than a year later, is likely to set the stage. And instead of acknowledging that he made a mistake or acknowledging that that was wrong, he's trying to double down on it. Let's give him more. I mean, days ago, and yet we're still listening to him. It's just really, really sad that that's the case. And it's time for people to start looking at ground truth reality. That's what we talk about here. Well, that's your deep dive for today, folks. Appreciate you sticking with us. We got some great shows coming up. We have Ted Postal later this afternoon at 3 p.m., who's going to be talking about something really, really important about the deployment of some nuclear weapons and some risks that we have that maybe you're not aware of. And then we've also got some other folks. We got, I think, Doug McGregor coming up this week. Lots of good shows here. So do stick with us. And we will look forward to seeing you later this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.